We love our American friends, and this is all just for laughs. So if these stories make you cackle, smash that subscribe button because it's free and helps us keep roasting Karens worldwide. Also, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. I was working at a cafe in Paris when an American Karen came in and demanded to see the manager because we didn't have iced coffee. I explained that we don't typically serve iced coffee. She said, "Every coffee shop has iced coffee." I told her, "This is France, and we serve traditional French coffee." She said, "I don't care where I am. I want iced coffee." I offered her an espresso with ice on the side. She said, "That's not the same thing." I shrugged and said, "That's all we had." She demanded the manager. My manager came out, a 60-year-old French woman who had been running the cafe for 30 years. Karen said, "Your employee is refusing to serve me," my manager said, "because we don't have what you want." Karen said, "Then make it." My manager said, "No, just flat out no," Karen said. "Excuse me?" My manager said, "This is my cafe. I decide what we serve. If you don't like it, leave." Karen was speechless. She tried to argue. My manager literally turned her back and walked away. Karen stood there for a minute, realized no one was coming back, and left. Best manager I ever had. My friend works at a hotel in Tokyo, and an American Karen checked in and immediately started complaining that the room was too small. My friend explained that Japanese hotel rooms are typically more compact. Karen said, "I paid good money for this." My friend showed her the room dimensions that were clearly listed when she booked. Karen said, "I didn't read that." My friend said, "That's not our problem." Karen demanded an upgrade. My friend said they were fully booked. Karen said, "Make it happen." My friend said, "I can't create rooms that don't exist." Karen demanded a refund. My friend said, "You can check out, but cancellation policies apply." Karen said, "That's theft." My friend called the manager. The manager, a Japanese woman who spoke perfect English, came down and listened to Karen's complaints. When Karen finished, the manager bowed politely and said, "I understand you are unsatisfied. Here is contact information for other hotels nearby. Please pack your things." Karen said, "You're kicking me out?" The manager said, "You said you wanted to leave." Karen backtracked and said she'd stay. The manager said, "I think it's better if you find accommodation that meets your standards," and had security escort her out. Karen tried to argue, but Japanese security doesn't play. She was out in 10 minutes. I was at a train station in Berlin when an American Karen started screaming at a ticket agent because she missed her train. She had arrived 5 minutes after departure and was furious they wouldn't hold the train. The agent explained trains run on schedule. Karen said, "I'm a paying customer," the agent said. "So is everyone on the train that left on time." Karen said, "This would never happen in America." The agent said, "You're in Germany." Karen demanded they call the train back. The agent stared at her and said, "Call the train back?" Karen said, "Yes." The agent said, "That's not possible." Karen said, "Everything is possible if you try hard enough." The agent said, "The train is 20 kilometers away by now." Karen said, "Then send a car to catch it." The agent said, "Buy a ticket for the next train or leave the counter." Karen said, "I want a refund for this one." The agent said, "No refunds for missed trains." Karen asked for a manager. The manager came over, heard the story, and told her the exact same thing in German first, then English. Karen said, "This is discrimination." The manager said, "This is policy," and walked away. Karen stood there yelling at no one. German people just walked around her like she didn't exist. My cousin works at a restaurant in Rome, and an American Karen sent back her pasta 3 times. First time, she said it was too al dente. The chef cooked it longer. She sent it back saying it was too soft. The chef made it again. She sent it back saying it didn't taste authentic. My cousin brought the chef out. He's a 65-year-old Italian man who's been cooking for 50 years. He asked what was wrong. Karen said, "This doesn't taste like Olive Garden." The chef just stared at her. Karen said, "I eat Italian food all the time and this isn't it." The chef said, "This is Italy." Karen said, "So?" The chef said, "Olive Garden is American food." Karen said, "It's Italian American." The chef said, "It's not Italian." Karen said, "You're wrong." The chef picked up her plate, walked back to the kitchen, and didn't make her anything else. Karen demanded to see the owner. The owner was the chef's brother. He laughed in her face. Karen said she wasn't paying. The owner said, "Then I call police." Karen said, "For what?" The owner said, "Theft of service." Karen paid, but left a 1-star review saying Italian food in Italy is overrated. I work at a pharmacy in London, and an American Karen came in demanding antibiotics without a prescription. I told her that's illegal. She said, "I have a sinus infection." I said, "You need to see a doctor." She said, "I don't have time for that." I explained that we cannot dispense prescription medication without a prescription. She said, "In America, I can get this at any pharmacy." I said, "That's not true." She said, "Yes, it is." I said, "No, it's not. You need a prescription in America too." She said, "Well, I get them anyway." I said, "Then you're breaking the law there too." She demanded to speak to the pharmacist. The pharmacist came out and told her the exact same thing. She said, "This is why British healthcare is failing." The pharmacist said, "We're literally trying to prevent antibiotic resistance." She said, "That's propaganda." The pharmacist said, "It's science." She said, "I don't trust your science." The pharmacist said, "Then don't trust our pharmacy," and walked away. She stood there fuming. Another customer told her to go to an NHS walk-in clinic. She said, "I'm not going to some free clinic." The customer said, "It's the National Health Service." She said, "I don't use socialist healthcare." The customer said, "Then suffer," and everyone in line laughed. My friend was on a bus in Amsterdam when an American Karen got on with a giant suitcase during rush hour. The bus was packed. She tried to shove her way to the back with this massive bag, hitting everyone. A Dutchman told her in English to wait for a less crowded bus. She said, "I paid for a ticket." He said, "So did everyone else." She said, "My bag doesn't take up that much room. It was literally blocking the aisle." He said, "Yes, it does." She said, "Mind your business." He said, "You hit me with your bag. It is my business." She said, "That was an accident." He said, "Get off the bus." She said, "You can't tell me what to do." He pressed the stop button, picked up her suitcase, and carried it off the bus at the next stop. She had to follow him to get her bag. The doors closed and the bus left without her. Everyone on the bus cheered. Dutch people don't play. My sister works at a museum in Madrid, and an American Karen brought a huge coffee inside, despite signs everywhere saying no food or drink. A guard told her she had to throw it out. Karen said, "I just bought this." The guard said, "You can't bring it in." Karen said, "It's just coffee." The guard said, "It's the rules." Karen said, "Rules are flexible." The guard said, "Not here." Karen tried to walk past him. He stepped in front of her. She said, "Are you seriously going to stop me over coffee?" He said, "Yes." She said, "This is ridiculous." He said, "Throw it away or leave." Karen said, "I paid for admission." He said, "And you can get a refund when you leave." Karen demanded to speak to his supervisor. The supervisor came and said the exact same thing in Spanish, then English. Karen said, "I'm a tourist. You should accommodate me." The supervisor said, "We accommodate thousands of tourists every day who follow the rules." Karen tried to sneak past. The supervisor literally took her coffee and threw it in the trash himself. Karen was stunned. She said, "You can't do that." He said, "I just did." She left threatening to report them. Nothing happened. I was at a post office in Dublin when an American Karen tried to mail a package without proper customs forms. The clerk told her she needed to fill them out. Karen said, I don't have time for that. The clerk said. Then we can't mail it. Karen said. Just send it. The clerk said. It will get sent back. Karen said. That's your problem. The clerk said. No, it's your problem. You'll waste your money, Karen said. Fine, give me the forms. The clerk handed them over. Karen glanced at them and said, This is too much paperwork. The clerk said, It's international mail. Karen said, Can you fill it out for me? The clerk said, No. Karen said, Why not? The clerk said, Because it's your package and your responsibility. Karen said, Customer service in Ireland is terrible. The clerk said, Customer responsibility in America is non-existent. The whole post office laughed. Karen threw the forms down and left. The clerk just shrugged and helped the next person. My brother was at a beach in Greece when an American Karen set up her umbrella in front of someone else's spot, blocking their view. The Greek family asked her politely to move. She said, I got here first. They said, We were here since morning. She said, Well, I'm here now. The Greek father said, Move your umbrella. She said, Make me. He picked up her umbrella, moved it 20 feet down the beach, and went back to his spot. Karen marched over and said, You can't touch my stuff. He said, I just did. She said, I'm calling the police. He said, Go ahead. She actually called. The police showed up, listened to both sides, and told Karen she was in the wrong. She said, How? The officer said, You blocked their space. She said, There's no assigned seating. The officer said, There's common courtesy. She said, This is discrimination against tourists. The officer said, This is consequences for being rude, and told her to move or leave the beach. She moved but complained loudly the rest of the day. No one cared. I work at a car rental agency in Barcelona, and an American Karen returned a car 2 hours late and refused to pay the late fee. I explained the policy. She said, I was only a little late. I said, 2 hours is not a little. She said, traffic was bad. I said, that's not our fault. She said, you should have built in buffer time. I said, we did. You exceeded it. She said, I'm not paying. I said, then we charge your card. She said, I'll dispute it. I said, and we'll send documentation showing you agreed to the terms. She demanded to speak to my boss. My boss, a Spanish woman who does not tolerate nonsense, came out. Karen explained her situation. My boss said, you were late. You pay the fee. Karen said, but I have a reason. My boss said, everyone has a reason. You still pay. Karen said, this is unfair. My boss said, what's unfair is making the next customer wait because you were late. Karen said, I want a discount. My boss said, you're getting a late fee. Karen said, I'll leave a bad review. My boss said, go ahead. We have thousands of good ones. Karen paid and stormed out. My boss went back to her office like nothing happened. My friend works at a luxury store in Milan, and an American Karen tried to return a handbag she bought 6 months ago. My friend said, our return policy is 30 days. Karen said, I just decided I don't like it. My friend said, that's too late. Karen said, I spent $5,000, my friend said, and you had 30 days to return it. Karen said, that's not enough time to decide. My friend said, it's the policy. Karen said, policies can change. My friend said, not retroactively. Karen demanded to speak to the manager. The manager, an Italian woman in her 50s, who looked like she had zero patience, came out. Karen explained. The manager said, no, just like that. Karen said, you didn't even think about it. The manager said, there's nothing to think about. Karen said, I'll never shop here again. The manager said, that's fine. Karen said, you're losing a customer. The manager said, we have plenty. Karen left in a huff. The manager turned to my friend and said, Americans think everything is negotiable. They both laughed. I was at a restaurant in Stockholm, and an American Karen sent back her fish because it was too fishy. The waiter asked what she meant. She said, "It tastes like fish." He said, "It is fish." She said, "But it shouldn't taste this much like fish." He said, "Would you like something else?" She said, "I want fish that doesn't taste like fish." He said, "That doesn't exist." She said, "Then cook it differently." He said, "The chef prepared it properly." She said, "I don't like it." He said, "That's your preference, not our problem." She demanded it be taken off her bill. He said, "You ate half of it." She said, "Because I gave it a chance." He said, "You pay for what you eat." She asked for the manager. The manager came over and said, "You ate it, you pay for it." She said, "The customer is always right." The manager said, "Not in Sweden." Karen was shocked. She paid, but left muttering about European rudeness. The waiter told us she ordered fish and complained it tasted like fish. We all laughed. My cousin was at a train station in Zurich when an American Karen missed her connection because she was shopping. She tried to board the next train without a ticket for that train. The conductor stopped her. She said, "I have a ticket." He said, "For a different train." She said, "But I missed it." He said, "Then buy a new ticket." She said, "I already paid." He said, "For a train you didn't take." She said, "That's not my fault." He said, "It is your fault." She said, "I was shopping." He said, "That's a choice you made." She said, "You're being unreasonable." He said, "I'm following the rules." She said, "Let me talk to someone in charge." He said, "I am in charge of this train." She tried to push past him onto the train. He blocked her and radioed for security. Security escorted her off the platform. She screamed about Swiss hospitality. No one helped her. She had to buy a new ticket at full price. I work at a hotel in Vienna, and an American Karen checked out and tried to get a refund because she didn't like the pillows. I said, "You stayed the full 3 nights." She said, "With terrible pillows." I said, "You could have asked for different ones." She said, "I shouldn't have to ask." I said, "We can't read minds." She said, "Good hotels anticipate needs." I said, "We're a 4-star hotel, not psychics." She demanded to speak to the general manager. The general manager, an Austrian man who's been in hospitality for 30 years, came out. Karen explained her pillow issue. He said, "Did you call the front desk?" She said, "No." He said, "Then how are we supposed to know?" She said, "That's your job." He said, "Our job is to respond to requests, not guess them." She said, "I want a refund." He said, "No." She said, "This is terrible service." He said, "This is you not communicating." She threatened to report us to tourism boards. He handed her his card and said, "Here's my information so you can spell my name correctly." She left furious. He went back to his office laughing. I was shopping in Copenhagen when an American Karen got into an argument with a cashier over the price of an item. The sign said 50 kroner. Karen said, "This says $5. The cashier said, "That's 50 kroner, not dollars." Karen said, "It looks like a dollar sign." The cashier said, "It's the Danish krone symbol." Karen said, "That's false advertising." The cashier said, "You're in Denmark." Karen said, "So?" The cashier said, "We use kroner." Karen said, "I only have dollars." The cashier said, "We accept credit cards." Karen said, "I shouldn't have to pay conversion fees." The cashier said, "That's between you and your bank." Karen said, "This is a scam." The cashier said, "This is currency." Karen demanded a manager. The manager came and explained that Denmark has its own currency. Karen said, "The EU should have one currency." The manager said, "They do. Denmark isn't in the euro." Karen said, "Why not?" The manager said, "National sovereignty." Karen said, "That's inconvenient." The manager said, "For you, maybe. Do you want the item or not?" Karen left without buying anything and complained loudly about European complications. My friend works at a gym in Brussels, and an American Karen signed up for a membership, used it for 2 months, then demanded a refund because she didn't get results. My friend said, "That's not how gym memberships work," Karen said. "I paid for results." My friend said, "You paid for gym access." Karen said, "What's the difference?" My friend said, "Results require effort." Karen said, "I came 3 times." My friend said, "In 2 months." Karen said, "I was busy." My friend said, "Then that's why you didn't see results." Karen said, "The gym should motivate me." My friend said, "We offer personal training." Karen said, "That costs extra." My friend said, "Correct." Karen said, "I shouldn't have to pay more to get what I already paid for." My friend said, "You paid for a gym, not a guarantee." Karen demanded to speak to the owner. The owner, a former Olympic athlete from Belgium, came out. Karen explained. He said, "You came 3 times in 2 months and want a refund." Karen said, "Yes." He said, "No." Karen said, "Why not?" He said, "Because you had access to everything and chose not to use it." She said, "That's not fair." He said, "Life isn't fair. Neither are fitness results without work." Karen cancelled her membership and left a review saying the gym scams people. The owner framed the review in his office. "I was at a cafe in Oslo when an American Karen complained that the prices were too high. She said, $8 for a coffee?" The barista said, "It's 80 krona." Karen said, "That's still expensive." The barista said, "This is Norway." Karen said, "Coffee shouldn't cost this much anywhere." The barista said, "Our wages are higher, so prices are higher." Karen said, "That's socialism." The barista said, "That's economics." Karen said, "In America, coffee is $2. The barista said, "Then drink coffee in America." Karen said, "I'm here now." The barista said, "Then pay Norwegian prices." Karen said, "This is robbery." The barista said, "This is listed on the menu." Karen demanded to pay American prices. The barista laughed and said, "That's not how international commerce works." Karen said she'd report them for price gouging. The barista said, "To who?" "The price police." Karen left without buying anything. Another customer said, "Americans always think everywhere should be priced like America." The barista said, "And cheap like America pays its workers." Everyone in the cafe agreed. My sister works at a spa in Bali, and an American Karen booked a massage, then complained it wasn't the same as her spa in California. My sister said, "This is a Balinese massage." Karen said, "I wanted a Swedish massage." My sister said, "You should have specified." Karen said, "I assumed you'd do it the normal way." My sister said, "This is the normal way in Bali." Karen said, "I want a refund." My sister said, "You received the full service." Karen said, "But not what I wanted." My sister said, "Because you didn't communicate what you wanted." Karen demanded to speak to the owner. The owner, a Balinese woman, came out. Karen explained. The owner said, "You came to Bali and expected Swedish massage." Karen said, "I expected professional service." The owner said, "You got professional Balinese service." Karen said, "That's not what I paid for." The owner said, "You paid for a massage." "You got a massage." Karen said, "I'm leaving a bad review." The owner said, "Go ahead." Our 5-star rating can handle it. Karen left fuming. The owner told my sister, "American tourists always want everything exactly like home. Then why travel?" I work at a train ticket office in Edinburgh, and an American Karen came in wanting to buy a ticket to London for the next day. I told her the price. She said, "That's too expensive." I said, "Book earlier for cheaper fares." She said, "I'm booking now." I said, "Then this is the price." She said, "Give me a discount." I said, "I don't have authority to discount tickets." She said, "Get someone who does." I called my supervisor. She came out and told Karen the same thing. Karen said, "This is discrimination." My supervisor said, "Against what?" Karen said, "Against last-minute travelers." My supervisor said, "That's called surge pricing, not discrimination." Karen said, "It's unfair." My supervisor said, "It's business." Karen said, "In America, we can negotiate prices." My supervisor said, "Not on train tickets you can't." Karen said, "I'll take my business elsewhere." My supervisor said, "There's only one train company on this route." Karen was stuck. She paid full price while complaining the entire time. My friend was working at a restaurant in Lisbon when an American Karen demanded they split her bill 8 different ways. My friend said, "We don't split bills that many ways." Karen said, "Why not?" My friend said, "It's complicated and slows down service." Karen said, "I've done it in America." My friend said, "This is Portugal." Karen said, "Just use separate cards." My friend said, "Our system doesn't work that way." Karen said, "Get a better system." My friend said, "Or you can sort it out amongst yourselves and pay in 1 or 2 transactions." Karen said, "That's not my job." My friend said, "Neither is doing your personal accounting." Karen demanded the manager. The manager came out and said no to splitting the bill 8 ways. Karen said, "This is the worst service I've ever had." The manager said, "And you're the most difficult customer we've had today." Karen's friends were embarrassed. One of them just paid the whole bill on her card to end the situation. Karen still left a bad review, saying Portuguese restaurants don't understand modern payment systems. My cousin works at a pharmacy in Prague, and an American Karen came in wanting to return opened medication. My cousin said, "We can't accept returns on opened medication." Karen said, "I didn't like it." My cousin said, "That's not our problem." Karen said, "It didn't work." My cousin said, "Did you consult your doctor?" Karen said, "I don't need a doctor." My cousin said, "Then how do you know it didn't work?" Karen said, "I just know." My cousin said, "We can't refund open medication for safety and legal reasons." Karen said, "That's a scam." My cousin said, "That's pharmacy law." Karen demanded to speak to the pharmacist. The pharmacist came out and explained the exact same thing in Czech, then English. Karen said, "I want my money back." The pharmacist said, "No." Karen said, "I'm reporting this pharmacy." The pharmacist said, "Go ahead. We follow all regulations." Karen left threatening legal action. The pharmacist said, "Americans think they can return anything anywhere." My cousin said, "Even medication they already took." They both laughed. Alright, that's it for American Karens getting humbled abroad. If you enjoyed watching them meet their match, make sure you're subscribed for more, and I'll see you in the next one.